Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Here we are back on a Sunday, just because I'm back on holiday. I'm off on holiday, I should say, this week. Also because it's probably the first time we can opine about the chaos grenade the Premier League kindly threw away last Friday, which blew all of our plans pretty much out the water. Cheers, lads. And yeah, a real panic stations at the last minute is definitely worth looking over, and it's definitely forced to change what we're going to spend most time on this pod. But so be it. We rarely get many, if any, WTF moments in FPL, and this was one for the ages, so we're definitely going to savour it this week. Plus, well, what a Premier League weekend. Both of our teams won in uplifting fashion, especially my lot Arsenal just now. I mean, bloody hell, I'm still in a state of shock. I can't believe what I just witnessed. What a game. My daughter, I think, panicked a little bit when I celebrated Lewis Skelly's goal in particular. She's seen me animated about football like that in a long while. But yeah, well, just in a state of absolute comatose after that performance. Shame about the FPL, but I suppose that's what we're here to discuss nevertheless. And Sam's with me as per, no doubt buzzing off Southampton's away victory. Priceless, getting close to that derby points total now. But yeah, FPL has been, gone the other way, hasn't it really? How are you, mate?
Yeah, all good. I couldn't quite believe what happened on Friday afternoon. I think it was just after midday the news dropped, and I had a busy Friday at work, so I didn't really get much chance to think it through. I know you didn't either, and we were both out afterwards on the Friday evening. So it was a little bit odd for such a massive kind of sideswipe from the Premier League all of a sudden. I don't think anyone really saw it coming, but yeah, generally speaking, all good. Southampton won. Obviously, we'll go into all the repercussions of that Friday news in today's pod. But yeah, the big news, of course, is Southampton have 9 points, so we only need 2 more to equal Derby. That is, of course, what we all want to talk about today. Only kidding, of course. We are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll run through our team updates very quickly. Obviously, we're only about halfway through the game week, really, with 2 pretty important games to come, or at least 1 very important game to come. Panic Stations, of course, the title of today's pod. We'll be digesting the chaos grenade that the Premier League threw our way, discussing what ultimately we decided to do in our teams, thanks to that chaos, and speculate about how the season from this point forward might look, considering the curveball that's been thrown at us. We're going to do the Vanilla Season Awards as well. So the Vanilla Season, as we see it, is up until this point, looking at all of the best performers before we hit the double game week period of the season. So we're going to run through all of the data and have a look at who has taken our eye in the first just over half of the season before we kind of go into the double game weeks, the blank game weeks, and all that chip season, and things get a little bit chaotic, as Friday, of course, previewed for us. Of course, we'll leave all of the game week preview stuff for a week on Tuesday, so that'll be the 11th, I believe. And there's very little we can discuss in terms of transfer plans because we don't know which teams are doubling just yet going into game week 25. So, of course, we can speculate, but I don't think we can go into too much detail as to our exact plans just yet.
No.
I do know that we both played our assistant manager chip, so we'll be discussing that. It's Sunday, the 2nd of Feb. Chelsea, West Ham are on tomorrow. Then, of course, we've got the final double game week of 24. Sorry, the final fixture of double game week 24 on the 12th. So lots of time between then and now. And obviously, we'll get in another show before we even finish off game week 24 as well. So game week reviews so far, Tom?
Yeah, let's flick to it, I guess, and yeah, a bit of a painful one for you so far.
Not as painful as I think it looks on
Is it
screen.
because the assistant manager isn't added into the
That's
points
it.
list?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't know why FPL do
might be
that. So
correct.
like, if you're like me and you're looking at your FPL score on the actual app, and panicking if you've hit your assistant manager chip and your points seem a little bit low, it's because for some reason they haven't worked it out to actually add it to your total point score. So I'm actually on 75, which again isn't brilliant. The only people that have returned for me have been those with a double game week. So the Everton boys brought in Pickford, got the assist, which I cannot quite believe, especially after 11 seconds as well. The Sofa scored notification came up for the goal before the
Yeah,
kickoff notification. I just couldn't believe it. Anyway,
insane.
so yeah, the only players that have returned are all of my double game weekers, that being Gakpo, Salah, who I captained, not triple captained. So that actively hurt me, although not that much. Trent went off after the clean sheet was locked in, and Moyes getting 12 points in that first fixture against Leicester. Obviously was about as good as you could have really hoped, considering he didn't have table bonus there either. All of my single game week players have all blanked so far, which has been a bit frustrating. But considering I didn't have Chris Wood, only dropping 50, 60k isn't that bad just yet. I'm hoping to resurrect something like a grey, maybe even a very small green arrow, considering the players I've got left. So it's not great. I would have liked better. And it's really only Chris Wood that's hurt me, but it's not a miracle week, is it?
No, definitely not. It's been a bit underwhelming, really. It's a week I always expected, as I said last time round, before in the before the event, to call back that Richardson Weblook sketch. It's a week I always expected a red slash, would have been happy with a small red or like a grey, but I didn't really, and we'll discuss it in a minute. Expect to have the system managership active right now. But yeah, as you kind of touched on, the week started off absolutely horribly. No Chris Wood, no Forest defence, massive safety score before the game week even started. And as with you, I feel like I've gotten off lightly, to be honest, by only having, I think it's about a 30-40k rank drop. I did Route and Die, which I made kind of before we put last week. I'd made that before the news came in. That's clearly been a bit annoying, judging by, it could happen that, I end up selling a player who eventually gets double game week, who's also scored a goal. And it was looking even worse before Ndai popped up in the dying embers of that Everton thrashing of Leicester. Looking at rolling the other bit of the 0.2 million in the bank I had when the news broke, I ended up needing some cash for Moyes. I had free Liverpool already, same free as you, who obviously ordered points, and landed on moving Gordon to Cliver. I eventually ended up benching Cliver in favour of Ahmad, not to benefit either way because they're both blanked. In a kind of keep it simple move in the panic of Friday. As you mentioned, I was going out on the night and thought, I'd bet my transfers before I go out, otherwise it could get pretty messy. And yeah, the money free allowed me to get some Moyes. Still got loads in the bank for the next ones, and I may even end up with loads more if the potential Trent injury. He came off after kind of 70 minutes, didn't he? Slots of these not going to play in the Carabao. And we'll need to see what happens there. Other thing I did this week, which is unusual for me, was a last-minute switch of Hall in for Gabriel, who went to the bench. Just thought with the Wilson out news at Fulham, there was a good chance that Newcastle 1-0. How wrong was I? Luckily, the loss was only 1 point, but my bum, Sam, was very tightly clenched every time Arsenal had a corner. When he was shaping up to do the overhead kick, I was like, oh my Lord, here it comes. But yeah, luckily, that didn't happen and we still got the win. So 78 points, small red, 6 to play with Palmer tomorrow, and Dye and Mikalenko, maybe Trent, and Gakpo and Salah with a defensive armband on. And yeah, as mentioned, I'll be really happy if I can get out of this week with a small red, and I'd be ecstatic with 100 place green or something like that. Like it's one of those really. I think a lot of it does come down to Moyes' table bonus. If there's a 0-0 in that game, we are, absolutely laughing, which sounds weird because we've got 3 Liverpool. We might end up with 2, but in this scenario, I think we're kind of going into that game being massive Everton fans, effectively, aren't we? So yeah, there we go. But hey, plenty of time to go in this double game week. Just got to hope that I think Palmer's a snoozer for both of us, but just got to hope that kind of that goes our way. in 2 weeks' time, which seems wild, doesn't it? But yeah, so turning the page, I guess, to this week, we're going to go off piste a bit with there being so much happening between this and next game week. Sorry if you're expecting a Game Week 25 preview. We'll do our best to do that next Tuesday, as Sam touched on. But this pod and the next pod, I think, are probably the first time I can think of, Sam, that are going to be within the same double. So the first topic and the name of this pod, Panic Stations, was just because, honestly, Sam, when the news dropped late morning on Friday, I was absolutely thrown. A total curveball, an absolute rug pull, a real head spinner. I saw your text as I was finishing the table for what's now the second part of this pod. And I was simply like, what the actual F? Because, I mean, these moments, these kind of WTF moments, very seldom happen in FPL. Like, for all intents and purposes, it's apart from on the weekends, when your phones pop in, all this sort of thing, it's actually quite. You don't do anything. We talk about it a lot, but actually, I think we calculated last year that it's only like a kind of 150 actions you make every season, something around that. And it's just absolutely wild when something like this happens, and all of those plans, all those best laid plans, gang after glay in massive fashion, screw it all up, throw it in the bin, try to start again. I mean, we're both at work. I saw your text. I was like, what? This is wild. Like, it's fair to say no one saw this coming, did they?
No, and I know there were maybe a few rumours beforehand that double Game Week 25 might happen, but the closer we got to it, the less likely it seemed that the Premier League would be proactive in actually rearranging. And actually, they threw in more potential fixtures than any of us were even mapping out on the off chance that they did throw in a double game week then. So I think there was a very slight, maybe like 10% chance that they were going to bring the Spurs game into that game week just to manage their flow for the rest of the season. Because if they get to all the cup finals, it gets a bit tight for them for rearranging extra fixtures. But then they obviously put in the possibility of the Liverpool game getting brought into a double, giving them 2 doubles on the bounce. Of course, also Arsenal-Chelsea, if Arsenal are to turn it around against Newcastle, then they could double in Game Week 25 as well as the teams who go up against all of those 3 clubs too. So Fulham, Aston Villa or Chelsea could all also obviously double, as illustrated correctly on screen by Tom here. So what that all meant was, well, we've now got the only period in the season where there are back-to-back double game weeks, and that instantly made the assistant manager chip way more powerful because it's the only chip you can carry through game weeks. So you can actually have a manager guaranteed to play 5 times rather than your standard 3. 4 would be the expectation if you play it through a double game week. This is the only opportunity to get 5 games from them. And both of us were in a position where obviously you didn't have your triple captain. I did, and it was active. But having spoken about it for maybe all of 5 minutes over text, it became pretty clear to us both that the opportunity was too good to be missed on assistant manager. Now, considering the extra fixture, that 20% extra benefit of having 5 instead of 4 fixtures just seemed too good to pass up, really. And obviously Moyes has got us off to a good start. If you went with Slot as well, equally very good start, and you probably back Slot to have a slight advantage going into the second game. But if Moyes can pull off something, then we're absolutely laughing and it's all been worthwhile. It does mean that we're both making an extra transfer next week though, Tom, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I think, I had the grand plan of kind of, rolling the free transfer over, going all in on Bournemouth and all this sort of malarkey against Southampton. I think now kind of, obviously we can't plan anything until Thursday the 12th, the evening of that, when we'll have an idea of who the assistant manager is going to be that we'll move over to. We've got a little bit of depending on what that double looks like, a bit of work to do really in terms of how much we want to go in on that particular double. Because looking at the teams who could double, we both kind of said this, didn't we? Like Liverpool, yeah, we've got three of those, that'd be fine. Villa 0, Spurs 0, Fulham, you've got Robinson, I just sold Raul Jimenez. Arsenal, I've got Gabriel and Raya. You sold Raya this week for Pickford. And Chelsea, we've both got Palmer. And so we've got very, very little coverage of most of the doubling teams, bar Liverpool, and in my case Arsenal with 2. So that kind of added an extra layer of complexity. It just meant that, hey, if I go for it now, I can, I got a little bit lucky because I had the extra free transfer basically, so I was able to kind of make the money for Moyes. But I saw people kind of taking -4s, -8s, and people removing Gakpo so they get slot in and things like that. all moves which would be completely and utterly off the table at any other juncture other than this. But there was a world when all of those moves were reasonable, and obviously, you're 5 points up at the moment if you've sold Gakpo effectively for slot. So but it was such a curveball. Honestly, I was kind of trying to wrap my brains in advance of this evening, to trying to think about any other curveballs that have happened like this. And aside from stuff like, I don't know, I remember there's an Aston Villa game in the pandemic times that got called off kind of with like 40 less than an hour to go, and loads of people had like Watkins and maybe Martinez and that sort of thing. I think I actually bought Watkins in that week, for example, and it got called off with like less than an hour to go. But I mean, that kind of feels like a bit of a within the moment. Whereas this, you're just like, oh my God, okay, but at least I've got a little bit of time to react. But within that reaction was, I suppose, it's like the beautiful mind kind of gif when all the possibilities are floating through your head. And there was so much sort of efficiency in how we were kind of just, I sent you a voice note, didn't I? And I was out for lunch, just kind of, right, this really does need to go this certain way, because with basically everything that happened, I just kind of touch on what you were saying again, like, because the assistant manager we got 5 games from the assistant, suddenly this looks better than going into 36. And James from Planet FPL, who is the Don, he and Ben Crellin, the co-dons, I guess, of this, both were kind of saying, well, 36 now looks like it could be a bit of a damp squib. 33 looks like it might be the bigger double. So then, before, when we're talking about the chips a couple of weeks ago, we were saying, well, 33, 36, that's your bench boost in assistant manager. Now, because of having 5 fixtures all of a sudden, the assistant manager shifted straight all the way back. So I feel like, right, I haven't got triple captain, I'm going to play it now, because it just seems to make a lot of sense. And obviously Moyes understood the assignment, and got his double digit haul, which is obviously absolutely lovely. But it must have been a tricky decision for you, though, because if you had a triple captain in the pocket, there's definitely kind of like, well, this week may have been the week to play it, and trying to weigh that up with the assistant manager, Cherry, which has kind of been lowered in front of you. That must have been quite a tougher decision for you, because for me, it was kind of like, right, I'm doing it. I think this is really straightforward.
Yeah, it was twofold for me, because I kind of done all the research to make me want to triple captain Salah this week anyway, and at the same time I also knew that game week 36 through to 38 is when I wanted to assistant manager. Like, I knew that there would be opportunities then. I liked the fact that a lot of people were going early on it and I wasn't, so I had that up my sleeve for the end of the season. So to kind of abandon all those plans based on the news that broke on Friday felt a little bit like going against my own instinct. But obviously I don't want to be stubborn for the sake of it, and the information given meant that actually there was a massive advantage to switching that plan up. Now, like I said, obviously this is most people's situation, but we had 1 day to prepare. I didn't really have much opportunity to really map out my moves several weeks in advance. So I did some rough planning and worked out that, okay, either way, I need to have X spare money to get off of David Moyes next game week. And if I was to maneuver a way to get to Arne Slot, that makes me 2 extra transfers down. And it basically became a bit beautiful mindy, where I'm overthinking everything. And it basically just meant at the end of the day, I had to abandon going for Wissa, which hasn't actually worked out too badly this week, although it does mean I've kept João Pedro somehow again on my bench, though, it is worth noting. But it meant that because I didn't make that move, I've got the exact money in the bank to upgrade David Moyes to a silver if Tottenham were to progress against Liverpool. If it goes the other way, then I'm going to be assistant managering Emery next game week instead, and either of those have good table bonus opportunities in that double, as well as a fixture that they might do a bit better in as well. So I needed to give myself that extra money, and it also meant that those extra transfers I'm using, because I probably will use a transfer on each week I've got the assistant manager going into 25 then 26, that is 2 transfers down on where I wanted to be. So I had to be maybe stress testing my lineup for the next few game weeks to make sure that I could afford not to have those extra transfers to use on players. And all of that at the last minute, it's quite confusing even explaining it now, let alone on the moment when I had to react, and we all had to react. So I still don't know whether I've made the right choice, honestly. I just know that I reacted to some information. I've got an extra game out of it. And I'm just really hoping that later on in the season, there's another opportunity to triple captain that makes sense for my team, because I am annoyed that I haven't used it this game week, especially the result that has happened already. But I was very happy with my plan. This information did change things though, and I didn't want to be stubborn for the sake of it.
Yeah, no, you've got to. It's one of the things you had to react to, but I completely, on the other hand, respect those who just said, you know what, okay, I'm happy with the plan to triple captain here.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll look for another kind of opportunity to use that assistant manager. But as fast as said in the chat, it basically boiled down in my mind, especially with not having triple captain, that it felt the optimal time to use the assistant manager, the most powerful game chip in the game, with one extra fixture. That just kind of was where it was for me. And yeah, it's a much easier decision for me without triple captain than it was for you. And I suppose the upshot of this as well, in lots of ways, is that perhaps it might make the I'm not saying this is definite, and a lot of this does depend on how the fixtures fall. We don't know that yet, but one kind of bit of theory crafting that crossed my mind is that maybe it does make the chip strategy a little bit more streamlined, which has its positives and negatives. It has its positives because it's easy to explain, has its negatives because it may mean that everybody's kind of broadly following the same thing, which is potentially run through 29, wildcard and game week 30-ish around then to set up for a bench boost in 33, you free hit in the big bank in 34. As you've mentioned, find a triple captain somewhere. Maybe you'll have a rogue double game week. Maybe, game week 36, one kind of rogue fixture ends up there because there's the free midweek afterwards, which is why initially it was postulated that there could be a double in that week. Or you find a good single, as we discussed, a Palmer versus Nipswich or something like that. So I don't know. Maybe there could be a scenario where, and I don't really particularly favour it. I know some people are just like, oh, it's really good. It's really, really simple. But I don't really like if it's simple. I like there to be loads of different kind of paths. But if we kind of take TC out of the equation and just think, okay, this is used at some point, and it is kind of like the perhaps the weakest of all the chips. But in terms of if the system manager's been used now, well, not everyone did, but if system manager's been used now, then I think the rest of them do kind of fall into a bit of a fairly straightforward order, at least in my head. Don't know what you think, but that's kind of something that occurred to me in terms of how the rest of the season looks. But obviously, it's important to be flexible, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And until we get those Carabao Cup semi-final results, it's hard to really lock in on a strategy yet. Obviously, we get those on the 5th and 6th of Feb, so not too far away. By the time we get to the next pod, we will have those results and we'll know which teams are going to be doubling in game week 25 and therefore also blanking in 29 as well. Based on that, we might have maybe a little bit more exposure for doublers. Let's say Liverpool do get through. Then, okay, we've already got a triple up of Liverpool going into game week 25. We can probably get to 1 or 2 Aston Villa players. A lot of you will already have Rodgers, for instance. And then also that means that if you are a little bit more exposed to double game weekers going into game week 25, you've also got a few more blankers going into game week 29. So a free hit that week might be more sensible. If, again, let's say Newcastle get through against Arsenal and you've still got a couple of Newcastle players, for instance, you might also have Palace in there too. So it depends on your team structure, exactly which teams you've got exposure in going into game week 25 onwards. And it kind of, the logic that I'd apply to it is if you are maybe going into game week 25 without too many doublers, maybe that's not such a bad thing because that could also save you from needing to free hit in game week 29 and vice versa. So the strategy is going to come down a lot to the Carabao Cup semi-finals in the next few days. Once we know that, we'll know how popular game week 29 as a free hit is going to be, or whether it's going to be easier to run through that. And then, of course, wildcard kind of fills in after that based on what doublers we know we're going to get in bench boost 33, for instance. Obviously, triple captain's much more flexible, but the big one that it's all going to revolve around is when it suits people to free hit the most. And hopefully there's 1 or 2 surprises in the Carabao Cup and it throws in a little extra sprinkling of a chaos grenade because we know we like that. But relatively speaking right now, I think I'd prefer it if the results went the way that maybe we're expecting, just because it sets me up quite well for next game week in particular. And I've got the luxury of a few free transfers as well. So in my situation, I kind of like it to go as planned.
Yeah, lucky you. I think I'm definitely looking at one hit. Don't know about if it's going to be two. Martin's just asked in the chat, how do you weigh up the value of, for example, an Aston Villa player if it goes to that projection versus an extra chance to carry over your Game Week 30 wild card? And the answer is it truly it's the ultimate cop out, isn't it? I'm going to say it. I'm going to say the words. It depends. Hooray! But yeah, it fully and ultimately depends on your free transfer situation. Yes, okay, they've got a good double, right? But I mean, Watkins potentially injured. Duran's off. And in defence, we know what the Villa defence is like. It's I've got Kitchen Sponge, which is less porous than the Villa defence. So I mean, really, then you zero in on two assets. Really, is that Rodgers and maybe Martinez in goal? That's pretty much it. As far as I'm concerned, unless you're
Rashford, get Rashford.
Yeah, maybe Rashford. Yeah, maybe it would be that would be a really good punt. As Asensio as well. They're making a FIFA 19 team, aren't they? But yeah, maybe Rashford would be actually quite a fun one too. So Rashford or Rodgers. After that, I think their fixtures actually do fall off a bit of a cliff. But nonetheless, I do think there is a world, Sam, where I look at kind of the next few weeks as well, and maybe there could be a world where I literally just am covering a double game week with a manager, which is obviously insane, but that could be what happens. So I don't know. Say it is Villa, and say that I've got to make a defensive transfer, especially if Trent is out. I've got to make one because my defense is absolutely shot to bits now, because I've been carrying so much dross for a while in the shape of Van Useless, and I've got Mikalenko, who's probably going to have to play now, and then I've got Lewis Hall, who's away at Man City. So I mean, it's one of those where I think you can wait. You look at this double game week and think, it's double game week. Do I go hell for leather? Go as a transfers, absolutely fine. Go for it, definitely. Just make sure it doesn't impede those plans going forward. But like for someone like me, I've got to be quite targeted in the move that I do, because I will move over the assistant manager. Moyes isn't eligible for table bonus against. There's no world in which he's eligible for table bonus against Palace. And then after that, I think it might be a defensive sub, which in of itself means that I wouldn't be buying a Villa defender. If that came to pass, if it was Spurs and Fulham, then obviously Robinson or maybe even Porro are on the table. And Arsenal and Chelsea, if that happens, then I don't know what I'd do. Maybe look at Cucurella or something wild like that. But yeah, it's very much about your context here, which such is the beauty of this season. But to the detriment of being able to give substantial advice here on what you should do within certain situations, because everyone's going to be in a different one. And I feel like you've got a much more luxurious one. How many free transfers you got? 2?
3 going into next week. Yeah. And then one of them will be going on a manager. So I'll have 2 to use on players if I want to. So not too bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's looking very good, isn't it? And just one quick note as well. I spotted that Praz said earlier on in the bad place that if City failed to win against Newcastle in 25, there's a good chance the City-Liverpool game in 26 would be a table bonus game for Pep. So that could be quite fun. But yeah, we'll look at that in that week. What's quite interesting, I suppose, is that from playing system manager so early, we were definitely thinking last week that we'd be keeping an eye on the table for a long time, sizing up the possibilities throughout the back end of the season. It kind of makes our job a little bit easier. Obviously, we'll try to continue to put it in some aware that loads of people haven't played the assistant manager, but it definitely kind of makes our life a bit easier, doesn't it? Now we've kind of got out of the way, which sounds terrible, but it's definitely something which is it's kind of crossed my mind. In the top 10k this week, almost half used the assistant manager chip. Overall, it was kind of around 12%, according to live FPL. I don't know what that's going to shake down to in the engaged community. I don't know how you'd kind of pass the difference between those two. I guess what's that, 49 plus 12 shared by 2. Yeah, so I don't know what you get. 30% of people who've used their assistant manager, I guess, would be a way of looking at it. So I guess in the engaged community maybe a bit more, so maybe half people maybe used it and half people didn't, something like that.
Yeah, looking around on the bad places, you like to call it, or on Blue Sky, there does seem to be a lot of assistant manager chips active right now. I would say it's a pretty decent split between Moyes and Slot too. But obviously, if Slot doesn't get the double game week next week, then that will be a transfer waiting to happen for a lot of the managers who went with Slot as well. Because I'd imagine they'd on the whole probably prefer a manager with 2 games rather than 1, even though I would back them to do well in that Wolves game and probably cover off 10, 11, 12 points in that. But yeah, David Moyes is an obvious transfer out. It's a commitment we've both made. Unfortunately, it does mean that it's one extra transfer we both need to use next week. But I think given the upside of assistant manager, especially in a double game week, it was, again, an extra transfer. I thought it pays for itself. And it already has, even if I needed to take a -4 down the line, Moyes has made up that difference just through the goals they scored in the first game week. So that's absolutely fine as far as I'm concerned. It is a little bit annoying and a bit of a shame because I was looking forward to using it later on in the season and doing some real planning around it and using it as a weapon to try and catch up to people. Whereas now it feels like a little bit more of a shield move than anything else, just because not everyone, but obviously quite a large chunk of people have gone straight in with it this week. And a lot of them on one of 2 managers, and they've both kind of matched each other in the first game as well. So it feels like a net zero, especially when Chris Wood went and scored 17 points and I didn't have him. So maybe that's why I'm bitter. I don't know.
Yeah, it does leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth, doesn't it? Chewing on wood. I suppose I share your frustration really with having quote unquote having to use it here, and I do feel like it's been. Yeah, it's gone okay, hasn't it? Let's be fair. Everton winning 4-0 against. We were expecting them to beat Leicester, but 4-0 is very sort of on the outer rim of what that could possibly be. We said the other week that it was the feeble attack meets the defense made of biscuits, and I said it could go any way, but I think the 4-0 was very far out of the projections. But getting 12 points is obviously lovely, and then just fingers crossed that for a 0-0 or a 1-0 Everton or something like that in the Merseyside derby. Can I see that happening? Probably not, but one can always hope when it comes down to one game. But you're completely right that I was hoping to use it as a way to make big inroads into rank. And yes, okay, there may still be opportunities to do so. Emery is still going to count, for example, as if this does come to pass, will count at home to Liverpool for table bonus. And you may get like a decimation of Ipswich who do look like they're on their knees. So you could feasibly end up with quite a good number of points memory this week if that is what happens. If not, you really are kind of starting to dip into the pockets of basically everything. I think Ange double table bonus, isn't he? For United and Fulham, he should be. Maybe not United actually. No, that's just me. No, of course not.
Fulham's a great one. Nottingham Forest at home. That's like a 40% chance of a win, which is one of the highest table bonus win percentages over the last 8 seasons. Which could be a really interesting one.
That's one of the ones that you were kind of mentioning a couple of weeks ago that kind of could bear fruit.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're very inconsistent, Fulham. But I'm a little bit frustrated at having to use it, but I think that ultimately the cards fell in this way, and you've got to react to it properly. And I hope that I did, annoyingly, and it will mean a hit next week, almost definitely. But I mean, that's the situation I found myself in, and sometimes you just got to roll with it really, and kind of hope that it kind of all works out. But yeah, I mean, how do I feel about it? As I said, a bit disappointed I've had to use it. Happy with the outcome halfway through, and yeah, just kind of hope that there's going to be some. If there's one kind of table bonus result out of this, and I'm going to be pretty happy. If there's 2, I mean, that's dreamland really, and that's going to be that's kind of what I'd love to aim for. Has crossed my mind, Sam, that Southampton are at home to Brighton in 26, and that if this upswing does happen with Brighton as well on their knees, Ivan Juric, how much is he? He's definitely 0.5, isn't he? So it could be all sorts of wild and wonderful things that could be pulled out of the hat. But yeah, we'll wait and see. I mean, how are you feeling about it all? Just to sum up this section.
Yeah, it's a bit frustrating. It's led us on the whole all down a similar path, and it takes away a little bit of the variance towards the end of the season, I think. But it's an opportunity that, in my mind anyway, seemed too good to miss. And there's going to be differentiation in terms of which managers we all pick over the next few game weeks. For those of us who did go for it, of course. And some of us went for triple captain as well, and may even plan on using assistant manager next week. So there's a few different strategies at play here. It's by no means all down one path. It just kind of feels that way because all of the people who've been loudest in the last 48 hours have, of course, been the ones that have had to put out last minute tweets and messages saying, oh, I've changed all my plans. So it feels like a lot more than maybe there is. But, you know, the actual chip itself has gone well so far. So I can't really complain too much. Just the rest of my team's been absolutely shocking. So that's really on me, not the assistant manager chip in general.
No, I very, very much blame Brentford for not showing up today.
Yeah.
And I don't blame United because they're just rubbish, aren't they? But hey, there we go. Very, very painful. Right. Okay. I don't think there's anything else on that one, is there? So let's move on to what. Ironically, there was going to be the main focus of today's pod. I ironically just finished the table that's on screen if you watch on YouTube this before the news came out on Friday. But basically, it's look at the Premier League teams up until game week 23. So 3/5 of the season done, ordered by XG rank. If you watch on YouTube, it shows league position, team XG and rank, and the gap between league position and the XG rank. The top two players for underlying data and FPL points if they match, and finally team XGC and rank for context. So yeah, put that all together, Sam. Spent a good sort of 40 minutes doing it, and then got the rug pulled from under my feet by the Premier League. But we thought, hey, we've got time this week, we can still discuss it. And the reason for this was basically, as we enter chip season, it dawned on us. I think we were just kind of chatting idly the other day. The vanilla season is pretty much over. Vanilla season being the time without playing many chips, and maybe a rogue triple captain is played here or there, but it's not the time that is kind of the Flight of the Conchords style business time for FPL managers. So we thought we'd look back at the first 23 weeks and see what we can find out in our analysis, and we'll probably go into this next week, we can learn anything from that going forward, plus hand out some potential vanilla rewards as we go, a bit like how we do on the final pod of the season. So spending a bit of time this week, just because we've got the extra kind of pod here, just doing a bit of retrospective really on what we've seen over the last 23 weeks. General discussion here. I'm not going to go team by team, just because we've spent a bit of time now and talking about what happened on Friday. But maybe we'll have a focus on the gap, the league versus XG, and discuss what the first kind of 2/3 of the season was like, and maybe hand out a few kind of formative awards. But yeah, I think kind of looking at this table first off, just to kind of just highlight a few things. I know that if you're listening, I'm just going to do that rather than read it all through. But there are a few teams in positive balance in terms of league versus XG gap. So their XG rank is much higher than the league position. So Forest plus 12, Arsenal plus 5, Everton and Brighton are on plus 3, and Fulham, Villa and Ipswich are on plus 1. And there's teams negative balance as well. So Spurs are 6th overall for XG, but found themselves in 15th on game 23. So they're on a -9 balance, Sam, which probably isn't actually that much surprise if you think about what we've said about them all season. Chelsea and Bournemouth doing much better in the XG than in the league positions. Brentford as well on -4, Brentford on -3, and Wolves, Southampton, United all with a -2. So there's quite a lot of teams kind of not really matching their XG performance, as it were, this year. And it has been one, I suppose, I think we definitely see this every season. You're never going to see kind of the XG match the league ranks, but I mean, Forest in particular, and maybe Arsenal as well, being where they are, maybe not so much of a surprise in Arsenal's case, but a real surprise package in Forest, and maybe also Bournemouth on the other side.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is obviously the XG gap versus their actual league position tells maybe half the story here too. So obviously Forest haven't got the greatest team XG in the world, 28.5 so far going into game week 24, but their defense ranks 3rd overall. So that actually paints more of a picture as to where they're really gaining that edge. The same goes for Arsenal too, which again, the second biggest gap in terms of XG versus league position, 5 up. But again, their defence is ranking second and only just behind Liverpool by about 1.2 XG across the season. So they're making up for that gap with defensive solidity. And although they haven't been necessarily the two most potent teams going forwards, they're still creating enough going forwards to outbalance or outweigh the defensive performance. And therefore, they create that margin in the gap between. So Arsenal Forest, they're far above their XG, but very much similar to their XGC, which again paints the whole story then when you use both in combination. Same goes for Spurs in the opposite direction as well. Obviously, they came out the traps really fast with lots and lots of great games in terms of high XG data for them, but their defense has gotten slowly and progressively worse across the season. Obviously, big part of that is their injuries, but like you said, they're -9 on the XG gap. So they're 15th overall, 6th in terms of team XG. But they're actually, is it 15th or 14th? 14th overall for XGC. So much closer to where you'd expect them to be versus their league position. So again, the story is told in the gap between, or the margin between those two, rather than just the XG per se.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because a lot of the time the teams who are kind of matching almost, I guess, in terms of the gap, and if you look at their XGC, it kind of tallies a bit more. So obviously the combined picture of what you're doing up in the front end and what you're doing in the back end, that sounds awful, but are the two things which are going to decide your fate. And when it comes to FPL as well, what's really striking is that you've got 7 where there's a match, I guess, in terms of the players who are best for the underlying data and also best for FPL points. So those are Fulham. You've got Raul and Iwobi being the top for underlying, and those two obviously are the top point scorers. Other way around though, so Iwobi's got more points. And Isaac and Gordon, unsurprisingly, said in talisman theory last year that they were kind of co-talisman for Newcastle, how they did in 2023-24, matching as well in the points. Watkins and Rodgers at Villa, Palmer and Jackson at Chelsea, Wissa and Bumo at Brentford, reverse though, so Bumo's doing better than Wissa, but Wissa's underlying data is actually really, really good. Cunha and Larson at Wolves, and then Vardy and Buonanotte at Leicester. Buonanotte, of course, producing a lot of that under the previous manager before Van Nistelrooy came in. So yeah, a lot of the time I think you do have kind of these sort of discrepancies. So that means that for 13 teams, you do have the kind of discrepancies, not based on Bruno and Ahmad as well, actually, so there's 8. I didn't highlight that because I think I was doing that just as the news came in, Sam, and yes, there was another mistake where I had Southampton being 4th for XGC because I must have just stopped at that point and just kind of go, what the hell am I doing with my team? And yeah, there's definitely kind of a lot of discrepancies that we see sometimes between the online data and the FPL points, and a lot of that can just be explained by the mechanisms by which FPL works, especially, for example, taking Spurs. So you've got Solanke and Son being the top 2 players for the online data, but in terms of FPL points, you've got Maddison there because he had a few games where he just exploded, and suddenly that kind of booms you up the FPL points ratings, doesn't it? So yeah, I think it's interesting how it's happened so far. You've only got Salah in 200 club, but you've got Palmer kind of on his way to the 167. But other than that, we haven't quite had. Obviously, Wood's done very, very well, but we haven't quite had anybody kind of anywhere near Salah in terms of how the season's gone. But I think kind of other than his majestic performance, we are where we'd expect to be. It's just Arsenal, I think, in terms of the league position. I suppose it's kind of explained by the fact that their XG rank is only 7th. But you'd be expecting, and obviously Saka's injury is a big part of this, you'd be expecting kind of 1 or 2 of their players to be much higher up the overall FPL ranks than we actually see in them. You've got Kluivert, for example, outscoring the top point scorer, who is still Saka, or was still Saka, going into game week 23. You've got Maddison 5 points off. And you've got Ahmad 2 points off Saka. So there are these discrepancies get thrown up, aren't there?
Yeah, for sure. And Arsenal this season have been a team that have really shared around the points. It obviously doesn't help that their XG data, until game week 24, we haven't plugged that data in, obviously a little bit late in the day to do that. but it has been lagging behind some of the other bigger clubs out there who also have very potent attacks. Now, obviously, Forest have replaced a lot of that with Chris Wood in particular. But to see Arsenal with only one 100 club member going into game week 24, and that being a player that is out for quite a while now, does maybe simplify the player base that we can pick from right now. And although they're always going to be a great defence to back because they come at a bit of a premium price, and you've got teams like Forest, Fulham, Newcastle all putting up good underlying defensive data as well, Arsenal haven't really been as much of a factor in our teams for quite a while now, since Saka indeed did get injured, and a lot of people have been moving slowly away from them. So maybe that's something that changes in the last few game weeks of the season, because again, Arsenal have played most of their toughest away games already now, have a nice run all the way through to the end of the season, barring that Liverpool game, of course, which will be huge. And outside of that, is there really that much interest there now? Outside of Gabriel, possibly, you've still got Raya, but I don't think they're players that you're ripping apart your teams to buy, are you?
No, definitely not. I think that definitely there's maybe a case that in some cases the interest in terms of the overall template may have run its course, at least for the time being. So we picked out Newcastle last week or the week before as being a team where people are likely to be coming off. So sold Gordon myself this week just because of the curveball, but he was always likely to kind of be a bit of a fall guy to move on to a team that I'm interested in kind of having coverage for, up until kind of April, which is Bournemouth. Probably looking at Isaac as kind of a keep. Gordon, I think this season has been very consistent, but he hasn't been explosive, something that you mentioned a couple of weeks ago. And then Lewis Hall, one of those players who is in the zeitgeist an awful lot, just because of the fact that most of us who do own him got him super cheap, so he's kind of just there. But for the next three, I do think, for example, I anticipate sales of him probably going over someone like Kirkes, depending on what that double is, really. Those sorts of teams maybe kind of fall by the wayside just a little bit if you see a few tough fixtures, and then teams like Bournemouth come to the fore. But the good thing about that is that it is also backed up in the data. It's not like a proper flash in the pan, because their XG is so good. The league just doesn't quite kind of cover that, but they've got them kind of the magic formula almost of having a good XG rank and also a good XGC rank, and that's the sort of team you want to be investing in, right, going forward. So that's something I suppose that this sort of thing does sort of underline, and it also shows that kind of we've got 23 weeks in, we've had our flirtations with triples up on these teams, we've had representation from probably a lot of these teams in the past in our team. So Villa, there was a time when I had Watkins and Rodgers, like Rodgers long gone, Watkins even longer gone, and Wolves, I had Cunha. Those people probably had Cunha and Ryan Out-Nouri at one point, the likes of maybe Palace, maybe there was like a Mateta kind of hanging around. If you had him this week, for example, you were probably very excited by that. Fulham, those people probably had double, Raul and probably Robinson at some point. But these players all kind of fall by the wayside, may well come in. The main one, though, just to kind of talk about is City again. So fourth overall for XG, fourth in the table, and 12th for SGC. I think they've just conceding goals for fun effectively. And it's actually been quite handy almost, Sam, hasn't it? After the first it took us a while to get rid of Haaland for Salah effectively, which is probably reflective in our ranks. But it's also been quite convenient, hasn't it, that we can kind of forget that City exist quite a lot, just because their players are very, very on the most part expensive. If you think about the three key targets, well, four. I don't think anyone's actually going for KDB, so maybe it's three. So Haaland, Foden, and Guardiola, and taking them out of the equation has been so helpful, because it means that you've got all this money suddenly available to push into players elsewhere. And I just wonder whether if we do see a resurgence from them on the back end of the season, I mean, game week 29, there's going to be a lot of interest just because they're not blanking, and obviously Foden and Haaland offer decent captaincy alternatives. But after Liverpool in game week 26, like, their run is really, really damn good. Ignore the FDR. The run is amazing. And that could be the time when City do kind of, I think it's a top four kind of season for them, isn't it? But that could be the time when they come back into our thoughts, thankfully, around the wild card. Game week 30, they've got Leicester.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that'll be the next big mix up in FPL when we do start hearing about them more in the zeitgeist, and content creators will start talking about them around about that time. Haaland's difficult to get in without ripping apart your sides, but obviously all it really takes is one of Salah or Palmer to kind of go off the boil altogether, and then it becomes much easier. Some people will be able to have all three, but at the detriment of the rest of their team. If players from Bournemouth, Forest, Fulham, all of these kind of sides with cheap assets continue to perform well and look like good buys or good holds going into the back end of the season, then maybe it will be possible to fit in a team with 3 premiums once again, or maybe you go sort of a 2 premium and a premium light in Palmer alongside Salah and then Foden rather than a Haaland. Obviously, those of you who've had Haaland and Foden in the last few game weeks haven't actually had it too bad at all. Foden in particular has been tearing it apart, but sitting on the sidelines, just watching them get the points whilst the ownership is that low hasn't really been that painful. It's just maybe an opportunity missed with Foden in particular, because you could have had him in over a number of great midfield options and outscored a lot of them. With Haaland, obviously he's been getting a few goals here and there, but he's not really been hugely outscoring some of the alternatives in his position. And for that price, you do need him to be outscoring them quite considerably. And obviously captaincy needs to be a factor too. So yeah, there'll be options again later on in the season. For now, it's been quite pleasant having not to worry about this massively owned Erling Haaland scoring every week. It's not been that painful, but it probably will get a little bit more painful towards the end. And if you're chasing rank and there's this great team going forwards with high upside picks there that no one owns, then it's going to start getting quite tempting to go against the grain, maybe even back against reliable players like Salah and Palmer if you're chasing towards the end of the season with those good fixtures.
Yeah, I mean, you probably would have to kind of start to think about going for it, wouldn't you? Hopefully, a Marmouche or something will provide a good option there, because I mean, a lot of there's a boomos in many teams, but Brentford's fixtures really do die a bit of a death between game week. I think it's game week 30 and then 34, 35. Like none of the pretty tough fixtures, but when you know what Brentford's like. In prep for this, I did have a look at on FPL Optimized, who are in not very long launching a new thing called Solio Analytics, which should be really good, really interesting to see what they come up with as an analytics tool. I had a look at my kind of team of the year, effectively, Sam, for this, just to see kind of how different that is overall. So over the last kind of 23 weeks to where I anticipate the template going, or at least kind of what my team looks like. And it actually is quite similar to the team I've got. So in goal is Raya still. And I've had Raya since game week 1. So that's no surprise whatsoever. And I think he will be moved on at some point, probably in the game week kind of 30 wild cards, depending on what happens with the doubles. I think he's the closest I've ever had to. He must be the player who's been longest in my team. Maybe Salah in seasons gone past. Trent, Gabriel, and Hall at the back. So basically, the three I played, I've been playing quite often. In midfield, it's been Salah, Palmer, Bumo, and Saka. Obviously, that was before his injury, but he was ticking over quite well, wasn't he? Before that, and up front, it's Haaland, Isaac, and Cunha, who did absolute bits for me for a little while, and I sold him too early. But I suppose that kind of just goes to show you that 8 out of 11 of them are still hanging around in my team. So it kind of, the first sort of 60% of the season, which is basically what's passed, the vanilla season, these players, I guess, form the building blocks of what kind of the template is, while we've still got time in the bank effectively. But as you kind of talk about in terms of going on to Haaland and taking on the likes of Salah and Palmer, when we get towards the back end of the season, that's when our teams sort of mutate into a sort of Frankenstein team of purely focusing in on those gains where we can possibly get them. And I think that's going to be what's particularly interesting kind of going forward, because I suspect we'll all end up with there's going to be a surprise player of kind of the back end. There always is one, maybe like a Lingard's-esque sort of character. Maybe it's already happened. Maybe Chris Wood is that story for, he will be that story for loads of people. But I'm sure there'll be one or two places, as I mentioned, kind of a Marmouche or a Bumo, who could kind of come in. Yeah, I mean, in terms of I guess a few sort of bits and pieces in terms of the vanilla awards, shall we say? It's making me want ice cream stand this. But the vanilla team of the year, if we're going to, so for the first 60% of the season, if we were going to offer out a figurative gong, I mean, it's got to be Forest, hasn't it? With maybe Bournemouth second up, but Forest, the overperformance on league position versus XG, as I said, it is plus 12, mainly, as you said, powered by defence, and Chris Wood's just unbelievable. It's just a monster this year, but like huge overperformance. He and Boomer actually, the huge overperformance in the league, both over 6 more. They've got 6 more goals in Chris Wood's case, almost 7 more goals than they should have. But I don't know. They are definitely the surprise package for this season, aren't they?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt in that whatsoever. Obviously, Liverpool are having a great season, but that's much more in line with our relative expectations. Forest going into the season, I think a lot of people would have had them even pinned as not maybe not relegation candidates, but certainly in the lower half of the table. So for them to be doing what they are doing, especially with Chris Wood up top, absolutely dripping in FPL points at the moment, is kind of crazy to see that happening week on week. And we've both gone against them for almost the whole season now, and it's been so painful. Yeah, look, they are definitely the vanilla team of the season so far for me.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose the link to that is it surprise of the year, which I suppose is kind of a bit of a sloppy second on this. But I think I don't know whether it's just being too recency led by kind of nominating Bournemouth for that. It's just because just out of nowhere, especially because we saw the injuries and we're like, oh well, they're probably out of there. But in fact, the opposite became true, didn't they? And hasn't it? And they before they lost Liverpool, they hadn't lost the game since game week 12, which is absolutely marvelous, really, in terms of what Areola's done there. And they've got an abundance of players who, all right, now we're in a bit of an atypical time, but in typical times, especially within a vanilla season, and maybe we're all slow to it, offer really good budget options. So Kirkes, Kluivert, Semenyo, and since Evan Nilsson was injured, Dango himself, all providing those sorts of excellent high potential edge pieces, which I think definitely again would have come as a surprise, and maybe come out as a surprise in a different way to Forest, where okay, maybe there's an odd Langer or a Hudson-Odoi or a Gibbs-White kind of floating around, but it really has been Wood plus one defender. Ina's their second highest scorer, but my sister has had Ina since game week 3 or 4, and she's just like obviously over the moon with him. And this is one of those things, as you said, dripping with FPL points, and here we are dripping with FPL blood effectively by losing out on them. Whereas Bournemouth, I think we've been kind of almost lucky that they've been underrepresented till now, but I suspect with the game coming up as well, they're going to be a team that are going to be a force to be reckoned with up until kind of towards the end of the season, because they've got really good fixtures basically all the way until game 35, when they've got Arsenal, Villa, and then City in the kind of 35 to 37, when maybe we might see people jumping off. But yeah, maybe would you have them as surprise of the year, or maybe Spurs being rubbish? Maybe that, I don't know.
Yeah, that isn't the word you wrote on your notes about Spurs, is it though, Tom? But no, they've been really quite horrific compared to the data we maybe expected from them at the start of the season, because they didn't even start off too badly in the underlying numbers either, including in defence. So yeah, they've been a surprise going in the opposite direction. But yeah, look, if we're going to give team of the season so far to Forest, because they would probably be the surprise of the season if we're honest, outside of that, it would probably be Bournemouth. And it's not just the fact that they've been good recently. It's also just the fact that against even the biggest teams, they are putting up a real fight. They were unlucky not to get a goal or two against Liverpool. Obviously, big chances created there. I think it's fair to say Liverpool deserved to win, but they've been incredibly competitive against all of the bigger sides this season, taking points off a lot of them. I think going into game week 24, they managed, was it 15 points against the top 6, something like that? And the data it's not a flash in the pan. The data suggests 3rd best XG rank, 7th best in terms of the defense. It's very very impressive what they're doing down there. And yeah, look, there's FPL options all over the pitch for them now, really cheap ones at that, and a great fixture run to come. So yeah, I think it would be kind of ignorant to not suggest that they are one of the surprises of the season. I think it still annoyingly is Forest, but you don't want to give them the same award twice. It's like giving player of the season and young player of the season to the same guy. It's like mix it up. So yeah, so Bournemouth, come on, we'll bring them in.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe let's take negative side then. So probably it's got to be Spurs. Maybe United as well, but I mean, I'm happy about United being rubbish. To be honest, I know I'm wearing the Arsenal shirt, and I should probably be like, "Oh yeah, I really hate Spurs," blah blah blah. But yeah, it's growing up surrounded by Arsenal fans in Essex. You can't help but cultivate a dislike of United fans, everything they stand for, basically everything about them. I kid. There's some United fans are nice people, some of them, and I mean, obviously they've had a tumultuous time, and Ahmad's been a revelation in terms of the price. I got him at 4.9, for example. I suspect I was planning to sell him off, but I suspect in kind of the confines of where I am, he does stay, especially because there's a 29 versus Leicester, so it probably is going to stick around. Yeah, it's between those two really for maybe vanilla disappointment of the year, shall we say, in terms of teams. We'll move on to players in a minute, but in terms of teams, I think it has to be between those two, really, unless you want to throw your beloved Saints into the mix, Sam.
I'd really rather not.
Yes, this is pretty open.
No, look, we've been horrendous, but I don't think it's been a surprise to see us be poor. Maybe as poor as we have been, that's been the surprise, if anything. But I don't think anyone would be shocked to see the Premier League table at this point of the season with us nailed to the bottom of it. I don't think that's massively surprising. Obviously, the points total is probably half of what we'd have wanted right now, but still, it makes very little difference in the grand scheme of things. I don't think it's half as surprising as Spurs or United being as poor as they have been. I'd probably give it to Spurs, though, overall.
Yeah, no, I think so. Player of the year, on the positive side, I mean, it's got to be Salah, of course. Chris Wood, I think, is in with a definite shout, just because maybe you could figure that Salah is performing to expectation. I mean, yeah, I don't think he is. I think he's overperforming expectation. Remember, there were some shouts at the start of the year that Slot's not going to be good for him. Youch. And definitely confounded those doubters. So yeah, maybe you would look at Chris Wood as being that. Maybe there's a kind of Bumo's in with a shout, but Bumo is hugely performing as well, unsurprisingly, and you've got a late sort of comer to over 100 in Cliver after the two hat tricks. But I mean, every year you do have your Danny Ings sort of character who outperforms his data for a middling team, or at least one that was perceived middling team at the start of the season. And Chris Wood's definitely been that, and it has been to our chagrin as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, Salah, obvious pick because he's as good as he is, and that shouldn't go unnoticed. But if we're going to award a surprise, it probably would be Chris Wood. You mentioned correctly people like Cliver and Mbermo. It's obviously quite interesting that all of those players that you mentioned are penalty takers, something that we do mention quite often on the pod, but it does make a difference. And it gives them that extra opportunity to be a standout if their team is able to win those penalties for them. But of course, all of those picks have been fantastic this season. Chris Wood has been probably the most surprising of the lot, but Salah versus expectations is still a massive overperformance, even compared to his very, very decent average points totals anyway. He's still absolutely flying, and he could easily break his all-time record for FPL points. So yeah, it's got to be Salah, and then Chris Wood after that is probably the next down. Although honorary mention to Isaac as well even. So yeah, he's been great recently. Little bit of an injury in the middle to take him off of what would be mega points, but yeah, he's been great too.
Yep, no, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. And I suppose it's basically apart from Chris Wood, I don't think there's particularly players, because at the start of the season expectations were high for Isaac, and as you said, what happened nearish the start was the red card, obviously in the Saints game. completely changed the complexion of that game when he was the most captain player to start the year, and then got that injury and all that sort of stuff. But came out fighting, and things have kind of slightly fallen off a little bit recently. But did score a brace against Southampton, but at home been the famous. The famous St James's Park kind of a 12th man hasn't quite kind of come to fruition against two sort of plucky upstarts in terms of Bournemouth and Fulham. So, yeah, I mean, I look at it and at the moment and just think, actually, it's not as surprising as I thought it would be, almost in terms of these players, which that's just the nature of FPL. It really is. Turns positions quickly. The goalkeeper of the year at the moment, by default, the winner is probably Matt Sells, I suppose. You know, a player who I think was in Newcastle for a little while, wasn't he? And has kind of come out of nowhere really to Forest. I don't know if it was. I think he might have been at Newcastle in the Championship rather than in the Premier League.
Okay.
But has come out to Forest. I think he was signed last January transfer window. No one really had particularly high hopes for him, nor really the Forest defence. But out of nowhere, here's a guy who is pumping out the clean sheets left, right, and centre a lot of the time, and sometimes as well just grabbing those saves to supplement it. And you know, he's far and away the best 4.5 keeper. Like if we all had our time again, and knowing what we know now, he'd be in every team at the start of game week 1, and maybe in future. We'll see how it goes to the end of the season. But a player like him is who we're going to be kind of on the lookout for next year, really, in FPL, because he is kind of the modern incarnation of a Nick Pope or a Tom Heaton when they were at Burnley, and just who was an excellent goalkeeper. Just leave him thinking, yeah, you know what, it's a good chance of clean sheets every week, and if not, they're going to get loads of saves, right?
Yeah. It's a perfect blend. Honorary mention to Pickford as well, who has now picked up an actual FPL assist. I think my first ever goalkeeper assist. So that's quite nice. And he's not too fast behind Sells, despite not having anywhere near as good data. But yeah, Sells cheaper. A bit of a surprise package as well. He at times was a bit flappy last year and wasn't necessarily the most convincing. But this year has massively stepped it up with Nuno and looks a really, really top-notch Premier League goalkeeper. And obviously he's doing the points, which always helps. So yeah, it's got to be him, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously at the start of the season hoping that Raya would be kind of churning out clean sheets like they did last year, Arsenal. But I mean, it went from kind of a ridiculous points per game of kind of above 7 over the first 4 weeks to about kind of 4 points per game over the course of the season. And part of me does wonder, should I at one point have taken that hit and just seen the way the wind was blowing with Forest and grab Sells? But I did have a look back at kind of what was going on with Forest, and it was only kind of around sort of game week 7-8 when that really kind of did start to become a thing, especially because Aina was so cheap. We'll come on to in a second, and so maybe I should have made the move then. But it kind of it's just kind of because of the position, you're just never ever really going to be prioritizing goalkeeper transfer. I had my time with doing 4 or 5 in one season, and now I just kind of think, you know what, screw it. And if Arsenal do get kind of a good kind of back end to the season as well in terms of the projections, it could be that he becomes my first ever season-long keeper. Not even Lundstram lasted the whole season, Sam. So we shall see on that one, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of movers and shakers as well in the goalkeeper position, probably on wildcard. Vanilla defender of the season. So it's not actually escaped my thinking that Trent's actually second highest scorer for defenders, which I think is quite interesting because he's had a bit of a malaise, really, hasn't he? He definitely kind of dropped out of. I'm sure he dropped out on both of our teams after kind of game week 6 in the wild card, and kind of was kind of floating around. But he still managed to kind of pump out enough to get him to second overall. He and Aina are the only two who are over 100 points. But Aina starting at 4.5 out of nowhere. I actually owned Aina a few years ago when he was at Fulham. I got a 9-pointer in a single game week, and I was very kind of happily disposed to him. And one of those players who, if you did pick him up very early, so 4.5 before he started his rapid ascent to almost 0.9. No, he is 0.9 more than he initially started. Wow. That's one hell of a surprise package, really, isn't it? And I suppose if you put them in as a unit, I think it's got to be someone from Forest, effectively, again, in terms of player of the season. But there's obviously shouts out there. So Robinson's definitely done a job for a lot of people. again, Forest, Lenkovic, Lewis Hall, a couple of memorable hauls, the 15 points versus Leicester, 12 points versus United, which I had him benched for. I don't know if I think you might have as well. I can't remember. And then a few clean sheets here and there, bought very, very cheap. And then Kirkez as well, by dint of a couple of 10-point hauls against Man City, and I'm going to say Everton as well. I think Kirkez is probably what I'm interested in going forward. But yeah, there are quite a few options here. I suppose it's got to be Aina by default, just for looking at the kind of the overall prices. But Robinson, for example, has served you pretty well.
Yeah, Robinson's been brilliant. Lewis Hall as well, I've enjoyed owning at times. But yeah, Aina, obviously, he's done the most points, so it's hard to look past him again as a surprise package and someone who started at 4.5. But yeah, you mentioned Trent briefly there. I think he's been a bit unlucky not to get even more points. The data's fantastic as always, and he has had injuries too. So I think in another universe, he would have been much more locked into all of our teams if he hadn't been a little bit unfortunate at times. Obviously, he's in a lot of teams right now. He might be injured again for the second game of Game Week 24. Fingers crossed he's not, obviously, in our situation. But he's been excellent as always. And I think he's just got such high standards now in terms of an FPL asset, a bit like Salah. He needs to do something exceptional for people to really stand up and take notice in this game. Obviously, he comes at the premium price point, which again makes it a non-contest between him and someone like an Aina, or maybe even a Robinson, like you mentioned too. But if you remove the price point factor from the discussion, he himself has also been absolutely immense. 7 attacking returns so far this season is, again, maybe a little bit less than maybe he's deserved. But yeah, he's got some great fixtures coming up, and he will probably kick on towards the end of the season if he's fit going into the next game. But yeah, it's got to be Aina again. And unfortunately, it's a bit boring. But when you start at 4.5 and your top scoring defender going into 3/4 of the way through or 2/3 of the way through the season, it's hard to really look past him.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one that I've still got an eye on for the back end of the season has to be Guardiola at City. He's the top scorer in terms of non-pen XG for defenders. Obviously non-pen because defenders aren't going to take penalties. Almost definitely, if they were Leighton Baines, we'd all own him. But yeah, I think he's free. He's got the same non-pen XG, Sam, as like Morgan Rogers, which probably isn't. If you've watched a lot of City games this year, it's not really much of a surprise given the amount of shots he has, which is. Again, it still remains pretty wild to me because I remember having Guardiola and Football Manager as like kind of a steady Eddie sort of centre back in the mould of Milenkovic. So seeing him recast as a left back come left winger has been quite something. But I think he given the fixtures that are going to come for City is probably one that I kind of be prioritizing, I think, on my late wild cards later on, just because of what he can produce. I guess within that, Munoz as well is actually just below. Not the best finisher in the world. Guardiola actually does have a finish on him. Munoz doesn't. It's fair to say. Gets in those positions, but that's kind of about it. But I guess you're always looking for the Alonso, the Estepinian sort of type who finds themselves in sort of wild positions. So I think either of those probably going to look okay. But yeah, I think Guardiola, I think, along with Kirkez, those would be two that I'd be interested in going forward. Kirkez, they've both done all right, both teams in the past. Guardiola, I think, is second to Haaland at the moment. I'm going to say, in terms of yes, he is. As it looks at the graphic that I put together, because I was just completely gone thinking about what the hell I was doing with my assistant manager at that point. But I think those are both players that I'll be looking forward to potentially picking up. I think maybe Kirkez next week, but we shall see. And Guardiola, I think, is very high in mind for any wild card later on in the season. Midfielder of the year, what's the point? It's got to be Salah, hasn't it, really? I suppose one thing, though, that I did kind of have in mind for this was just to kind of just quickly touch on Cole Palmer, just because I think, remember at the start of the year, he wasn't really in a lot of thoughts, was he? Because he was one of those players who got that huge price hike, 5.5 million price hike from 5 million. Well, he's never going to stay at 5, and last season about 6-ish. So maybe in practice, kind of 4 million, 4.5 million price hike up to 10.5. And people are, I don't know, Maresca, is he going to make everything change? He's quite like a systemsy manager. Is he going to make him, be a bit of a square peg in a round hole, etc., etc. So I think him being kind of a bit of a mainstay in our teams at the expense of Erling Haaland, principally, maybe he's in with a shout for the midfielder of the year. Obviously, I'm just covering for the fact that Salah is the obvious option. And as we discussed earlier on, there's probably not too many other players putting their hand out quite yet. Bumo maybe for the price has done very well to be in touch with Palmer, and then you've got kind of newcomers in Clivert, and you've got a Wobie over 100 points for God's sake. So this is quite a wild kind of area, but yeah, it's pretty much got to be Salah, hasn't it? But yeah, Palmer's been pretty good for the price, hasn't he? And I think he's definitely justified the price hike that they gave him.
Oh yeah, for sure, and he'll comfortably be 200-point club this year, which again is a fantastic performance for just his second full season as a regular starter in the Premier League. So yeah, he's lived in Salah's shadow this year because Salah's just been absolutely immense, but he himself has had a great season so far. Will finish on a very respectable, maybe 250-ish score, which in a lot of seasons would be quite comfortably the highest point scorer. It won't be this year, but he does deserve an honorary mention, as you say, Tom. But yeah, again, Salah's on 222 points already. That's almost 10 points a week. Although, sorry, it's even more than that now, isn't it? Because this is before game week 24. So yeah, he's absolutely flying. He's on track to break all the records. Let's give him his flowers. It might be the last year we get of him in the Premier League. So yeah, let's appreciate him while we've got him.
Yeah, the Trent is the swan song for Trent, isn't it? I mean, if he gets injured this week, would that be the last time he's ever in my team? Probably not, to be fair, because they've got Saints in 28. If he's fit for that, probably going to be looking at buying him in. Let's face it, if there's a game in 29, of course. But yeah, you're completely right on Salah. And yeah, it is what it is. And in terms of forwards, it's got to be Chris Wood, hasn't it? Honorable mention maybe for Cunha here, just because it's talisman theory in effect, isn't it, with Cunha? Streets ahead of Larson in terms of the underlying. Has signed a 4.5-year contract, I believe, but he's got a release clause, so I expect he'll be gone in the summer. But they've kept him for the last sort of few weeks of the back end of this season at least, and kind of the only reason perhaps that Wolves are out of the relegation zone, I think, maybe Matheus Cunha, will definitely be, I think, playing a role in our seasons again going forward. They've got a nice little run between kind of 27 all the way until kind of game week 31, and the Southampton game in 29, I think, will go ahead. And so it'll be quite a tough call. Maybe between him and Chris Wood, who's got Ipswich that week as well. But yeah, one of those players I think who I would like to see. If he was linked to Arsenal, it would be nice to see him there. So maybe instead of kind of just going over the Chris Wood stuff again, maybe kind of think about players who are going to be quite good second half of the season, and maybe we'll definitely carry this into next week, that's for sure. But you had your eye on Vista, and you were very close to going there this week. I mean, Brentford's fixtures are, until they kind of drop off that cliff that was previously mentioned, over the next 5-6 weeks, really, really good. This has got the underlying numbers better than Bumo's, and you would technically perhaps be expecting him to be involved. His XG was over 1, wasn't it, against Spurs, for example?
Yeah, I mean, Wiss has been fantastic. A little bit unfortunate not to get more than he has so far this season, but at his price point is thoroughly worth the money and great value. 6.3, I think it is at the moment, which I know he's not on penalties, but he's really got everything else about his game right now. He's very good on the minutes, great data in a side that are decent at creating big chances for both him and Mbeumo. It's a great pickup for the price, and I think he will be a factor going into the back end of the season. The other player that we haven't really spoken about too much today, but is really shining at the moment and getting a bit of a purple patch, which we saw at the back end of last season, is Mateta. Now, he could also be a player that really comes into our thinking over the last few game weeks. If he does continue this run of form he's on, he looks like his shoulders are back, really high confidence. And when you've got a striker that is just feeling it, you know that the points are coming around the corner from them. And it's much more noticeable, I think, when you've got a talismanic striker, when they're feeling confident, that you can almost cherry pick when they're going to be getting the points for you, whereas in any other position there is maybe a little bit less predictability about it because the chances are few and far between. With a striker, if they're getting 4 or 5 shots away every single game, and they're in good nick and they're feeling confident, you back them to score 1 or 2 of them a game. And Mateta seems to be the latest beneficiary of that. And I think, again, at the price point, considering I'm pretty sure he's on penalties now as well, could be a really interesting pickup for a lot of people going into the back end of the season.
Yeah, and he's got 2 really nice fixtures sandwiching a potential blank. So Ipswich in 28, and then Southampton away in 30, and then 29, don't know. So if you do have designs on a free hit in 29, he might be one of those kind of perfect pickups going forward, because as you said, he's one of those players. And I noticed this again in Talisman Theory, that under Glasner, he was a man transformed from a bit of a no-hoper, one of those players, a bit like his fellow club mate, who I believe is still, where the hell is old Edouard these days? Leicester, maybe. One of those. Yeah, I think he is at Leicester still on loan. But he was kind of in that sort of zone, wasn't he? A kind of player that we kind of forgot about. We didn't really, we forgot he existed. But we went from that to having that kind of ridiculous run at the back end of last season. You saw him in person, absolutely loved what he and Eze were doing together. And then, yeah, as you say, if you've got a player like that in his purple patch, we saw at the back end of last season, now things are ticking for Palace. Wow. I mean, yeah, definitely in mind. And I think he'll be really interesting going forward too. I don't know who else maybe might be on the list. The only one I could think of, maybe after kind of fresh off the performance today, is Kai Havertz at Arsenal. A couple of good games coming up against Leicester and West Ham. Unless we might sign a forward at some point. We shall see. Obviously, we won't be buying anyone in until next week, so the transfer number is long gone. But he might be an interesting punt, I think, for going forward, if we do kind of rediscover our attacking vim and vigor. Which a game like this, that just went tonight, could be the conduit to doing so. A lot of people can have Gakpo, for example, at the moment, so maybe that could be a swap over that could be on the cards fairly soon. If we are kind of starting to pair with likes of Ranieri and Lewis Skelly, of course, picking up. So yeah, maybe another one there that could be interesting. Didn't cover Rashford, did we, in the midfield? We kind of mentioned him earlier on, but he could be one as well if he does go to Villa, who could potentially kind of turn the game on its head. I don't even know what he costs now.
Could got to be like 6 or 6.8, 6.9, something like that.
6'6".
6'6". Wow.
Yeah.
Decent.
So I mean, that's going to be very difficult. That's going to be so tasty, isn't it? If they did get a double game week, I know their fixtures aren't particularly amazing. I mean, they've got Palace, Chelsea at home 26, who aren't the best defensively. Let's face it. Palace 27, Brentford 28. Probably got not that many worries about that. Need to see how it all kind of turns out with Europe and how he integrates into the team. But he and Asensio as well is coming in. All I know is that in Foot Manager, he was very, very good. That's all I can tell you about Asensio. But if those players do come in, then, suddenly we could have a couple of really interesting players, especially someone like Rashford moving mid-season to a team that's going to kind of put their arm around him effectively. Could be a really interesting pickup, as could Marlon as well, who's 5.5 I only saw earlier on. So yeah, new players to the league. Mention Marmouche as well. Could also be players to bear in mind that can maybe disrupt when we've come out of the middle of the season. But hey, I think that's probably enough on all of this. We've been going for an hour 20. Our teams and plans, I don't know whether we actually should bother, Sam, just because, I mean, we don't really know what we're doing, as you said at the start. So should we breeze over them? Do you want to just kind of give a quick thought on where you are, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, a breeze would be a correct way of defining it, because we don't have those results from the Carabao Cup. I don't know which manager I'll be transferring Moyes from. So it will be one of probably Silva or Emery, depending which way that Liverpool Spurs game goes. So I definitely need a free transfer for that. I've got 2 other free transfers to use. And again, it depends which teams end up doubling. If it's Liverpool, then that simplifies matters and I can lean into Aston Villa, get Emery, and then also get to Morgan Rogers probably for Ahmad, maybe get rid of him, although Spurs isn't a terrible game. Outside of that, I'm not really that interested in any Villa. Rashford would be great, but I can't realistically get there. And also, we don't know if he's going to be an immediate starter, so it might be a bit risky. If Fulham get the double alongside Spurs, as it stands, is it insane to just not have any Spurs? Like, I just don't know where I'd even go there at the moment. Like, none of them are really that tempting for me. So I'd have Robinson. I'd probably look at selling Pedro for Jimenez or something like that. And then bring in Silva alongside, and then that would basically sort me out. But at the moment, there's just not really much we can do planning wise. My team on paper, without any double game week fixtures loaded in, looks really good. I'm very happy with it, but it's not going to end up looking good when the double game weeks do get added, because I don't have much coverage in anyone other than Liverpool. So it's just keep my powder dry for now and wait until we know which way the wind's going to blow after Wednesday, Thursday fixtures are out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've got similar to you kind of formative plans, but I mean, a lot of it's going to be where the dust settles, and we're not even know that next pod, which is kind of frustrating. But I don't.
Will we not?
No, it'll be Tuesday because when's the Carabao Cup?
5th and 6th.
Oh, okay, so we'll know. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not an idiot. I'm an idiot. Yeah, no, that's good. So we will know. Hang on. So yeah, we'll have a much better idea next week of what's going on. But at the moment, my defense is shot to pieces. Honestly, if Trent's out, I've got Gabriel away to Leicester, Mikalenko at Crystal Palace, which is probably okay. But then I've got Van Useless at home to Chelsea and Hall away at Man City. So I'm going to have to make a defensive transfer no matter what happens. I think. Well, maybe not actually. Maybe then I'll look at, I don't know, maybe it would be a Rashford, but in for who? Would I be selling Ahmad? Potentially. Could I sell and die for someone cheap? I don't know. If Fulham get the double, then maybe Jimenez comes straight back in for me. It's one of those really where I've got lots of options. I've got kind of 1.5 million in the bank to move on, but it may be the case that I end up just kind of looking at it and thinking, well, I want to make a decision looking forwards to past this particular week. Yes, it's a double, but maybe it would benefit me more in game week 29 to buy a player in who's kind of 29 friendly, who has good fixtures, so like a Kirkes, rather than kind of looking at this week in particular. Maybe if it is a Rodgers, or maybe if do they have a game in between Villa before the next PL game? I think they do. They've got Spurs, I think, in the FA Cup. Is that am I making that up?
Yeah, they should have an FA. I couldn't tell you exactly who it's against. Whilst you're talking, I can try and find it.
Yeah, if they do have Premier League opposition, I'm sure somewhere in my mind it's Spurs. So maybe that would offer us an indication of of where Rashford would be. In that, I think so that's not until next weekend. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of time there, and then you'll be able to see, okay, well, if Rashford comes on as a sub, maybe a bit iffy, but a player like that, maybe he would be thrown in straight away, and then things kind of can start to get interesting a little bit. So I make a decision: do I want to sell Ahmad right now? Because I don't think I'm going to be selling Kluivert, Bumo, Palmer, or Salah. So I think Ahmad's the only one I would sell, but he's 29 friendly. So there's so much to consider. It might be, as I said earlier on, that I literally have just the manager who's got a double game week, and that's it. Which sounds a bit rubbish, but needs must effectively. My priority is clearly a defensive transfer, I think, unless Trent's okay, but I'm kind of iffy on that. But we'll have loads of time to kind of figure out exactly what goes on there. Cool. I think that's it for this week. Hopefully that was interesting. A bit of reflection on not a mad Diallo, but a mad few hours in fantasy football, as well as kind of a look back into the awards.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully you all enjoyed the ride. Obviously, we'll be back after the Carabao Cup game, so we'll have a little bit more information to base our transfers and our planning, especially with chips in mind, over the next few game weeks when we do come back, before we reach the end of double game week 24 though. Thanks in the meantime for listening. We have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA, or myself at FPL Pricey. On Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, it's WGTA_FPL. Again, I'm FPL Pricey on there. And finally, on Instagram or Threads, it's WGTA.FPL, and I'm just FPL Pricey on there as well. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could give us a follow on those social channels, that'd be greatly appreciated. But also, if you could give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening, or just dropping a like and hitting subscribe on YouTube, all of those things make a lot of difference for us. So thank you very much in advance.
Yep. Thank you very much, Sam. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll be back usual time Tuesday week. So not next Tuesday, Tuesday week, Tuesday 11th. Good to have the Carabao Cup fixtures in place for that. So we'll have a much better way of being able to give a preview. It won't have the second half double, but that is what it is. Right. We're off to, I guess, child our decision making, celebrate our decision making. I'm not even sure. Have a good week, a good weekend off FPL, and see you next Tuesday week.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.